Machiavelli is one of the most important thinkers in the Western canon that has been identified with the shift away from the ancients and the movement toward modernity. Most people will know Machiavelli for his work The Prince, irrespective if they've actually read the text. That said, Machiavelli was a man of letters, a constitutional author, having drafted 2 constitutions for the city of Florence during the Italian Wars, and his Discourses on Livy is probably his most important book. In fact, many political philosophers, from Leo Strauss to Philip Bobbitt, have noted that The Prince and Discourses are really meant to be read together, and brought together, they accrete into Machiavelli's grand theory of the state, his musings on power and republics. It is precisely this theory of the state that is generally identified as the difference between ancient and modern political philosophy. If that is the case, then Dante Alighieri and Marsilius of Padua can lay earlier claims than Machiavelli to having produced such theories, which mark the end of classical political philosophy and the birth of modern political philosophy. The ancients were not concerned with theories of the state as much as with the questions of virtue and virtue's role within political life. This is one of the major splits between ancient or classical political philosophy and modern political philosophy. The ancients are concerned with the politics of prudence and virtue, wisdom and virtue, whereas modern theorists are concerned with the state, and with the state, theories of power. And this is definitely the case with Machiavelli. Modern political philosophy, as such, is not idealistic. Instead, modern political philosophy is and can be described as realist, and that realism again is concentrated in theories of the state and state power. Machiavelli stands out because his predecessors, Dante and Marsilius, were defenders of monarchical absolutism in some form. Hobbes, who came after Machiavelli, also embraces a form of absolutism in the Leviathan. This causes many to see Machiavelli's promotion and his infatuation with republics as something unique among modern political theorists. The usual reading of Machiavelli is that because he was a republican, he therefore is someone who we can gravitate to in our own republican orders, as opposed to the, say, absolutism of Hobbes. However, only a cursory and freshman level reading of Machiavelli leads to this conclusion, because Machiavelli is in fact interested in absolutist forms of power, just like Dante and Marsilius of Padua before him, and much like Hobbes after him. Taken as a whole, The Prince and the Discourses on Livy reveal Machiavelli's mature thoughts on how a republic, even though it nominally is concerned with liberty, is actually the theory of government that produces the greatest amount of power for the state. Like the more famous state of nature theorists of a century later, Machiavelli takes conflict and chaos as the foundation for realism, and therefore the foundation for any political philosophy. In the Discourses, this conflict, which is found within human nature, has beneficial aspects to it. It fosters compromise, and from that compromise, a more even-handed and pragmatic constitution will emerge that was otherwise unlikely to have emerged if not for conflictual dialectic. Likewise, in The Prince, Machiavelli is worried about what being caught between warring powers will do to a principality. But the prince should be a student of conflict, war, first and foremost, so as to know how and when to act when the opportunity presents itself. And again, this is a major shift from ancient to modern political thinking, whereas Plato and Aristotle and Cicero would have taught that princes should be students of virtue and wisdom. Machiavelli asserts that the prince, the ruler, should be a student of conflict, of chaos, of war, of knowing that conflict is part of human nature, that you will never be able to escape conflict. And as such, because you spend your time studying conflict and power, you will be able to act responsibly when you yourself and your political entity comes into conflict with another. What people miss about Machiavelli's republicanism is what the Italian philosopher and political theorist Giorgio Agamben highlighted in his seminal work, Homo Sacer. For all the pretensions of monarchical states, monarchies were actually fairly limited in their executive power, limited by the church, the nobility, charters that had established and codified ancient customs into law, and there was a recognition that a monarch's sovereignty could be taken away at any moment because true sovereignty rested in the hand of God. Modern states, despite their pretension to compromise, limitedness, liberty, and respect for civil law, are in fact far more powerful and totalitarian than what the Whigs would have you believe about the absolutist monarchies of the medieval and ancient world versus the benevolent liberty of modern-day democratic republics. Giorgio Agamben highlights, again in his seminal work as well as in his other essays, what Machiavelli knew. It is actually the republic, and especially the democratic republic, that owns you and has the ability to become the most powerful state in existence, which is why the modern state can take away your rights and decide to blacklist you as an enemy of the state, whereby your life can be stripped from you because you're nothing more than a bare animal waiting in the wings to be sacrificed. And of course, all of us who lived through the COVID pandemic have learned that modern states can and do take away your rights. Machiavelli's republicanism, therefore, fits this same trend in thinking. Republics are superior to monarchies because republics have the ability to be far more powerful than any monarchy can ever dream. In part, this is because of the buy-in to the Republican Constitution, or general myths of the Republic, from the masses. After all, why would peasants care about the monarchy in its time of need? The peasants have no stake in the monarchy's continuation. However, in a republic, the masses feel like they have something at stake: freedom, social mobility, religious toleration, etc. And this, of course, was something that Machiavelli saw in the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic had a buy-in from its citizens. Its citizens had something very precious to lose if the Republic fell. Because there is a popular buy-in in the constitutions and the mythologies of republics, republics are therefore far more potent and powerful than we have been told by those who benefit most by republican government. There is a buy-in that extends to many instead of the few, although we also know through the realities of oligarchy that a privileged few often benefit tremendously so from a republican form of government. However, because many more people have secondary investments within a republic, they too have a stake in the politics and the polity's future. So much so in ways, and much more in ways, than peasants of a monarchy ever did. And thus, in the Discourses on Livy, Machiavelli highlights how all throughout Roman history and the history of Roman politics, that the citizenry buy-in to the Roman Republic gave it its great source of strength. And this follows also his general theme that he highlights in The Prince: centralized sovereignty. The Prince is a work all about how to keep power once you have power. The Discourses on Livy, by contrast, is much more intellectual and thoughtful, a commentary and exercise on the nature of constitutions, the constitutional state, its apparatus, but all for the same end, the preservation of the power of the state. All state power, all state interest, all political theory should be concerned with the preservation of sovereign power. Machiavelli's republicanism is not because of some noble belief in the republican ideal of limited government, although that is certainly sold to people to have buy-in to a republican form of government. Machiavelli's republicanism is predicated on his belief that republics can be much more powerful than any other form of state theory and government, and it is much more centralized and capable of existing in a modern world defined by technology, power, and conflict. We must remember that Machiavelli was living through the throes of a great geopolitical as well as civilizational revolution. The birth of modern technology was already beginning in Machiavelli's life. In the late Renaissance and into the early modern period, the emergence of the printing press, of cannons, of great weapons of war, the technology that eventually morphed and evolved into the technologies that we have today, was becoming very apparent in Machiavelli's life. And thus, a theory of the state had to be devised that wrestled with this new reality of emerging technology and technological power. Monarchies, according to Machiavelli, would be swept away because of their inefficiency and incapability of dealing with modernity. Republics, however, as Machiavelli looked to the example of Rome, were well positioned to take advantage of the new technologies, the new power, the new emergence of large-scale conflict demanding the mass mobilization of many people. When we look at the world today, it turns out that Machiavelli was probably right. In the names of those myths that the citizenry buys into, the republican state can increase its own power and authority by claiming it does so in order to defend the cherished myths and liberties of the republic. This might make you think twice about the absolutism of monarchies against the limitedness of republics, and whether or not that's actually true. And that is why reading Machiavelli is so important. While Machiavelli also includes commentary on how liberty flourishes in a republic, it is also a liberty that is premised on power. Peasants in an agrarian monarchy had some degree of liberty too, but it was very limited because it was not a powerful liberty. For Machiavelli, the true genius of republican government is how it empowers citizens, but most importantly, how it empowers itself. The real reason why Machiavelli endorsed a republic over all other forms of government is because a republic is uniquely situated to enhance its power and preserve its power in the modern world we find ourselves living in.